Well, thank you for coming, and I don't think there have been more people ever gathered in a room for a fern talk in the history of botany, so I'm grateful for this audience. Actually, I thank John Turner for inviting me, and the story goes that he found a rare fern for Long Island, never been seen before, and I was standing next to him at the time. And you can connect the dots, okay? And we'll leave it at that. Okay, so ferns. Yes, I'm going to start with, this is what we see on Long Island, isn't it? Every once in a while you come to a glade and it's just completely covered with ferns. And this is our deciduous forest. So I'm going to go over these issues here. What is a fern? What is not a fern? And there'll be fist fights after that, Fern life cycle, fern gametophytes, fern sporophytes, geological history of ferns, taxonomy of ferns, and ecology of ferns. I do it all because I had to. I was the only botanist in my department. Okay, so here we are. A fern is a member of a group of vascular plants. Plants with xylem and phloem reproduce via spores and have neither seeds nor flowers. They differ from mosses in being vascular, having specialized tissues that conduct water and nutrients, in having branched stems, and in having life cycles in which the sporophyte is the dominant phase. Like most other vascular plants, ferns have large multiveined leaves called megaphylls that are more complex than the microphylls of club mosses and horsetails. Most ferns are leptosporangia. I won't go into that, but anyway, sometimes referred to as true ferns. They produce coiled fiddleheads that uncoil and expand into fronds. The group in the broad sense includes about 10,560 known extant species. So there's the ferns. The fern life cycle. Ferns are characterized by a distinct alternation of generations called the diplohaplontic life cycle, in which the sporophyte is the dominant vascular generation and the gametophyte generation is ephemeral or cryptic. Got to do this because we got to do 101, Bio 101, again, to keep everybody on together here. So, two phases of the fern life cycle are the sporophyte, which is what we call the fern, and the gametophyte. You sometimes see it on bare soils, in the between stones of rocks and things like that. It's about a couple of millimeters long, and half a centimeter, and not much to look at. A life cycle, we're going to do this as John suggested I do. So let's start with the fern itself. How's that? Oop, sorry about that. Yeah, that's exciting. Oh, what happened here? Here we are. Okay. Always pressing the wrong buttons. Okay, we'll start with the fiddlehead, okay? And on the undersurface of the leaf, there are sori, little sort of brownish dots, and they contain sporangia in clusters. Here's a sporangium, looks like a helmeted soldier from the Paleolithic, I don't know. And meiosis occurs within the sporangium, producing spores, which have this haploid number of chromosomes. They germinate, forming a prothallus or gametophyte phase of the life cycle. They don't have roots. They have rhizoids, which absorb water and minerals, and they produce male sex cells in Antheridia and female sex cells, the egg, in Archegonia. Fertilization occurs by the sperm cells swimming down the neck of the archegonium to produce a zygote. The zygote continues to undergo mitosis to form a new sporophyte, still sitting in the gametophyte, okay? And that's the life cycle. Not too bad. Gametophyte, has the haploid phase of the life cycle, develops from the germination of a spore, grows into a heart-shaped structure, small, relatively thin, usually short-lived, dependent on moisture, has no roots. We said that already. Male and female, just to go over what we saw. Okay? Very good. Here's some nice photographs from the web about the archegonium and the antheridium. Female reproductive organ producing an egg cell. Okay, let's see. This is an actual view of it from the surface. They're located here at the apical notch of the gametophyte. And the antheridia producing the sperm cells are produced elsewhere on the thallus. Okay, antheridium producing sperm cells. And here's the sperm cells, spirally coiled. They snake through the water like this, and they're attracted to the archegonium, which those neck canal cells and ventral canal cells have already dissolved, and the egg cell is exposed. Okay. Okay, here's the fertilized egg cell, forms a zygote, which develops into a sporophyte. Just to go over the whole thing so we're on the same page. The sporophyte is the diploid phase of the life cycle. It's what we refer to as the fern. It comprises the rhizome or stem, which bears megaphylls and roots. Sporangia are produced on the megaphylls, usually on the lower surface. Sporangia are usually clustered in sori. The sori are covered by an indusium or by the edge of a leaf blade. Okay, and there's the rhizome down here. Let's get that right. The frond or megaphyll, the pinnae, subdivisions of the frond, sori on the undersurface. Okay, a terrestrial fern, rhizome on or below the ground usually, and there are climbing ferns which have the rhizome climbing up the trees. Okay. Here's a pinnae with sori on the lower surface, and there are two sori each covered by an indusium, and it protects the sporangia until they're ready to disperse the spores. The sporangium has an annulus and a lip cell. The annulus dries out, splits the lip cells, and then flings the spores out like David throwing a rock at Goliath. Here's the, this is, I can't remember what type of light this is, but it's quite dramatic to show the annulus on those sporangia. Okay, the annulus sporangia, I think we've got this down. And the gametophyte, spore, germinating to form the gametophyte. And these, you can follow the stages to the development of a heart-shaped, not always heart-shaped, but in this case, heart-shaped gametophyte. Okay, here are the other non-seed vascular plants. They are characterized by having univeined photosynthetic organs called microphylls. Microphylls in some carboniferous lycopods grew to a few feet long. So microphyll is probably not a good name, but I can't think of a better one. Spore-bearing plants that were termed fern allies is what we're talking about. For this talk, I confine ferns to megaphylous, multiveined leaf taxing, excluding the horsetails and the whisk ferns. Don't shoot me, please, okay? Because this is a big contention now. Even morphologists who should know better don't combine ferns and horsetails. Well, here are some non-fern allies. The Silotophyta, the whisk ferns. Now they're considered, some people consider them ferns, I don't consider them. I think they're direct descendants from the rhiniophytes of the upper Devonian. Single vein photosynthetic organs, microphyls, vestigial in xylodum, 2 or 3 fused, use sporangia. Those are very thick sporangia. Well, look at the, here we go again. I know I make that mistake. The fern, this plant, the whisk fern, it's not a fern, but it's a whisk fern, has dichotomous branching. Dichotomous branching is what liverworts have, what mosses have in really lower plants. And so this is a primitive type of branching system which isn't reproduced again once you've gone beyond that into pinnate branching. It's really an ancient form of branching. And here is Mesipterus, which grows on tree fern trunks in New Zealand. And this has a small branch which is not developed, which is dichotomous, but it's reduced to a unilateral branch by reduction. And there's the sporangia. Okay, then there's the lycopods, Lycopodophyta, and I think you've all seen them if you hike up in the Catskills and the Adirondacks. They're usually at higher elevations. We have some on Long Island, but the interesting ones are high up in the mountains. They have lots of names now. When I was studying them, they only had Lycopodium. Now they're Hupersia and Spinulum and so many different names. They have single leaves, microphyls. Where is this thing here? Here we are. You see these little one-veined leaves? You can't make it out. Here they are. And here's a fern in comparison. You can see the difference. By the way, the lycopods have been around since the Silurian, I believe. So they go back a very, very long way. Selaginella is the spike moss, and you can find many types of them. They're some of the most beautiful plants in the world, and they glow blue-green because they live in the shade of the forest and they absorb other wavelengths than the red wavelength of light. Green, excuse me, red. Okay, there's here are their sporangia. They're in the axil of the microphyll, and here they are flattened and arrayed into a fern-like appearance, but it's not a fern. Here's the quillworts. We have them on Long Island. They once were tall and unbranched. Now they're short, almost without a rhizome, and are still unbranched, a corm. You can find them in ponds at really some depth, and I've never actually, I can't ever remember finding them on Long Island, but they are here. I know that they're on Long Island at the east end. And here are the horsetails, or scouring rushes, Equisitophyta. And they have whorled branches. The leaves are vestigial, the microphyls are vestigial, and their photosynthesis occurs in the branches themselves. The vestigial microphyls look like this. They're fused together, and the branches, as you can see, are photosynthetic. Here's the strobilus. Here's the strobilus close-up. We'll get a little more on that, I think. Yes, here's the strobilus beginning to expand, and it reveals these sporangiophores, which have recurved sporangia. The sporangia face in toward the stem, and here it is. Okay, and here's a cross-section and a longitudinal section, cross-section of the strobilus. Okay, take some more water here. They're really distinctive. And here are some ancestors, I think, from the Upper Devonian. And the key is recurving. So here are the recurved sporangia. You can put a little flat top on that, and you've got the equisetum sporangiophore. Here's recurved sporangia in a whorl on Eviostachia. Here's the spiny one. That's kind of interesting. So these are distinct from the upper Devonian. Taxonomy. Form and anatomy of the sporophyte phase has traditionally been the basis for classification of ferns. The following orders have been recognized: Ophioglossales, Osmundales, Schizoales, Glyciniales, Muratiales, Hymenophyllales, Salviniales, the water ferns, Cyathiales, the tree ferns, and Polypodiales, the ones we see every day, mostly. Here, the Ophioglossales, they don't have sori. As you can see, they have sporangia on a separate branch of the megaphyll. And here they are. And this is Botricium, the grape fern, I guess because of these grape-like eusporangiate sporangia. Here's Ophioglossum with its fused sporangia in a spike. Very reduced. I consider that reduced. Here's the Osmundales, the interrupted fern. As you can see, is common in the rich woods on Long Island. And the interruption is the sporangia covering all of the pinnae for a section, and then interrupting the photosynthetic function of the pinnae. Here's Muratiales. We don't see these up in our area. These are in the tropics and the subtropics. And they're huge ferns with a very short base. Oh, there we go again. Sorry about that. I keep doing that. Okay. Short base over here, about a foot, maybe 2 feet high. Giant fronds coming out, megaphylls. They can be 30 feet long. And they're amazing. I'll show you a picture later. The eusporangiate sporangia are often in synangial clusters. That's this, synangia. Or they could be free, as I'll show you later, in Angiopteris. Okay, here's the variation in the Muratiales. This is only what's alive today. These go back to the Permian and probably the Carboniferous as well, yeah. So here's the free sporangia clustered into sora, you could say, and here are the fused sporangia in the synangium. Synangium, clusters of sporangia. Okay. Here's the climbing ferns, Schizoales, and the curly grass fern, which we do have somewhere, if anybody can find it again, on the east end of Long Island. Here's the curly grass fern from eastern Long Island, growing in the cedar bogs forest, and sometimes in the open. Here's the climbing fern, which has little fingers, and the fingers look like this on close-up, with sporangia packed side by side with a peculiar sporangium that opens by an annulus at the far end, and here's the lip. So it's you can think back to our modern Polypodian ferns, and it might be ancestral or another condition earlier. Lygodium is the climbing fern, and I've never seen it on Long Island, and I've rarely seen it elsewhere. It's a rare plant now, Lygodium palmatum. Here are Glyciniales. These are forked ferns. If you go to the tropics, it's almost everything you see in the tropics that's a fern is in the Glyciniales, usually Glycinia itself. They're pseudo-dichotomous, forking, and the sporangium looks a little bit like the Schizoales. They're really the next order over. And you can see the clusters of sporangia sori under the leaves and so forth. Here's the filmy ferns. They say you can read a newspaper through these ferns, so I never tried it, but I don't doubt it. They're 2 cells thick. They're always in the wettest of the wet rainforests, and they climb on trunks, or sometimes you find them on leaves. Here's the water ferns, the Salviniales. You have the Marciliaceae over here. Marsilia, looks like a four-leaf clover. It's a fern. Here's Regnolidium, which I found in California in a ditch, and that has only two of the fronds. And here's Azolla, which I found in Cunningham Park in one of the bogs there. Cyatheales are tree ferns, and they can grow up to, I think, 100 feet tall. I think the tallest ones are in Hawaii, but I'm not sure. They're usually high up in the mountains. In the lowlands, they're smaller underneath the big trees. And finally, what we see as ferns mostly every day are the polypodiales, common forest ferns from the tropics to the boreal regions, vines, epiphytes, and herbs. And this is Polypodium, Polypodioides. I think it has a new name now, Michoii. Ferns first appear in the fossil record about 360 million years ago in the late Devonian, but many of the current families and species did not appear until roughly 145 million years ago in the early Cretaceous, after flowering plants came to dominate many environments. The fern Osmunda claytoniana, the interrupted fern I showed you, is a paramount example of evolutionary stasis. Paleontological evidence indicates it's remained unchanged for 180 million years. Got to show a little respect for these ferns now. They've been around a long time. So here's the Silurian flora. No ferns, pre-ferns. These are the rhiniophytes and their relatives, and they're still discovering new ones. The Earth was covered with plants, but not any plant that looks like a modern plant, except maybe the whisk fern. Here's lower Devonian plants. Now, this only became available in 2013. I don't know of any lower Devonian floras that I've ever studied. I don't know of them. This is the first time there's a book, 322 pages with lower Devonian plants. And these are the ancestors to the ferns and the horsetails. So you can look at them yourself, and this is the real evidence for the origin of the ferns. I see recurved structures here. Here, it looks like a recurved sporangium. This could be an early pre-horsetail, you see. And look at this whorled arrangement over here. It's a cross-section through here. This may be the ancestral condition for the horsetails to form whorls. So these are really pre-ferns and pre-horsetails. Here's more lower Devonian fern ancestors, pinnate branch, the first pinnate branches. So this shows multicellular, multi-pinnae. So here's the phylogeny of lower Devonian plants from China that Hao and Zhu, I guess it is, 2013 show. So already in the pre-ferns, you have this group over here sorting out on a dendrogram, and here you have pre-horsetails sorting out, including what are called sphenopsids, which are really horsetails. They're not free horsetails. They're in that group. So they're distinctive. Back in the lower Devonian, how far back do you want to go before ferns, horsetails are not ferns? Okay, don't tell anybody about this now. They're not. Okay, and here's the time period, Silurian to Devonian, okay? And let's see, tracheophytes, rhineas over here, and so forth. Okay. All right, that's my thesis for the day. Okay. That's any paper that talks about the origin of ferns and horsetails, and that ferns, the horsetails are ferns, have them read this. If they don't quote this, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay? This is the paper. And I'll show you what they show otherwise. This is from the working phylogeny of chloroplast genes among the ferns and fern allies. Here's the authors over here. And what year is this? 2010. Okay, and so they have the horsetails, just to show you. Sorry about that. Here, keep doing that. The horsetails over here being more primitive than the ophioglossoids, Ophioglossum and Batricium, and the whisk ferns as advanced? I don't think so. Lycophytes, seed plants, and so forth. Now this is from chloroplast genes. This is a proxy for the evolution of the ferns. So this genomics really is limited. I mean, it's limited by, they're not even using the genes of the plants themselves. They're using chloroplast genes, and you've heard of jumping genes from Barbara McClintock and so forth. I think this is not the real deal. This is a proxy. What you saw in the previous slide was the actual plants themselves. So I rest my case, okay? Now I'm going to go on and enjoy myself. Okay, an early fern, Upper Devonian. This is when we learn about the ferns and from the Upper Devonian. And China has them as well. And so here's, I did it again, okay. Here's the leaf that's beginning to form a megaphyll, you see, or at least a pinna. So it's beginning right here. Look at these little pinnae here, you see? And so this is, you can call these ferns. I can call these ferns. Upper Devonian, they're really modern, more modern looking ferns. Probably the most famous ferns are from the fossil era are these Gilboa fossils from upstate New York, the Earth's oldest forest, located near the Gilboa Dam in Schoharie County. The region is home to tree trunks from the Devonian period, Upper Devonian, which occurred roughly 380 million years ago. So this is a reconstruction of that forest, and I think this is quite dramatic. Nobody knew what these were actually until they discovered the petioles of these ferns, or the rachis of the ferns, and then they realized they were ferns. Before this, you only had trunks. Nobody knew what they were. So now they're ferns, and the oldest forests in the world were fern forests on Earth. Here's a Sauronius in the Moradiales. You remember that group with the Synangia? In the coal-forming forests of the Carboniferous. This is what they look like. Here's the Moradiales today, and then here's Sauronius, tree trunk, and here's Moradia, or could be something else. This is, this looks like Angiopteris. Okay. Ferns in the Mesozoic of Antarctica. Maybe we're going to have ferns in the Antarctic pretty soon again, the way things are melting. But it happened before. We won't be around probably to enjoy it, but anyway. Cretaceous and Triassic. And these are the ferns of Cretaceous above and Triassic over here. So they've been around, and they look pretty much the same for a long time. Here's Osmunda, or Claytoniana, 180 million years ago. Wow. Wow. Here's Tempskaya, a schizoaceous tree fern, which we don't even have anymore today. You can see the trunk is just composed of these vascular traces. Here's another reconstruction of Tempskaya. Extinction of the dinosaurs was accompanied, even preceded by extinctions of major plant groups. Immediately after the Cretaceous, ferns spiked then composed 40% of the Earth's floras. And so here are the fern spores from that earliest Cenozoic. And here are, let's see, now flowering plants, 1, 2. This is a southern beech, which is Nothofagus, and this is a conifer over here. So that's what the microfossil record looks like at the end of the age of the dinosaurs. Fern spike, right at the end of the age of the dinosaurs, here. And then the other plants, the flowering plants, keep developing and evolving. Here's the Paleocene. This is after the end of the age of the dinosaurs in the Tertiary, and you can see the ferns look fairly modern, I would say. Ferns in the natural landscape. Ferns are encountered all over the Earth, from the Arctic tundra to the hot tropics, on mountains, in valleys, land, and in water. Mid-latitudes, that's where we are, land of the Polypodiaceae, deciduous forest, conifer hardwood forest, and conifer forest, and some examples from Long Island. Adiantum pedatum at the upper right, the maidenhair fern, probably the most beautiful fern we have. Here is Polisticum acrosticoides in the deciduous forest, usually in better soils underneath tulip trees, for example, you find these. Here's sori from a related fern, aculeatum, Polisticum aculeatum, just to show you what their particular appearance is. Here's Ophioglossales, Botrychium again, the rattlesnake fern. I found this in Cunningham Park years ago. It may still be there. Here's another Botrychium, Botrychium dissectum, which is the common one, I think, that we see. Two varieties, Obliquum and Dissectum dissectum, which is a really pretty fern. Grape ferns because of those grape-like clusters of Eusporangiate sporangia. Here's two particularly, I think, attractive deciduous forest Polypodiaceae. Dilipterus hexagonoptera, which I find in western Long Island, and Connectulus, which I think you can find out here as well, two species. Oak forests, Aetherium felix femina, the lady fern. I think we all run across that on our field trips. And Denstedia punctilobula, the hay-scented fern, which is probably the most common fern in the dry oak forests on Long Island. In the pine barrens, you have Pteridium aquilinum, the bracken fern. And here's the sori. Well, they're really, the undersurface of the leaf is almost all given over to sporangia, sort of marginal indusium, you would say. Here's the swamp forest with Osmunda cinnamomea, the cinnamon fern. I think it's called that because of the cinnamon color of the sporangia, which are formed here on separate megaphylls, separate fronds. And the fiddlehead uncoiling, which you'll see pretty soon now. Here's another swamp forest fern, Woodwardia areolata, the netted chain fern. And they have separate fertile and sterile fronds. Here's Woodwardia virginica, the Virginia chain fern, and out in Riverhead, in the Riverhead Cranberry Bog Preserve, you have them lining this little stream. I photographed this from the bridge, the newly constructed bridge. On the undersurface of the leaves are these sunken sori, which are very distinctive for Woodwardia virginica. Sometimes they give them a separate genus name. And here's the famous curly grass fern, Skyzia pusilla, which is the symbol of the Long Island Botanical Society. And I wish we could find them again, but anyway, it's hopeful that we have it. It's like the California flag having the grizzly bear, you know, there aren't any left, but hopefully we'll find them again. And the water ferns, Azolla, which I found in Cunningham Park, every so often they show up again. People think somebody emptied their fish tank and dumped them in, but I don't think so. I think they're there just waiting for the proper conditions. I think they're in our flora. And on boulders, this is up in Massachusetts, but anyway, we have boulders on Long Island. We don't have a lot of ferns on them, though. Oh, and this is John Turner. I thank John Turner for finding this, and here I am talking about it. We were at Fort Totten on a field trip, and John turned around and he says, "Cliff break." I said, "What? I don't think I've ever seen one before." And yeah, this was it. John Turner discovered it, and it's the first time it's ever been seen on Long Island, as far as I can tell. And that was November 17th, a day which will live forever in our hearts of Fern people. John? He found it earlier? Where is he? Where is he? Okay. No, forget it. Forget it. It's John Turner's day.
I was there on the same field.
Oh, you were there. Okay. Okay, we got this down now. Okay, here's the other fern found in the cracks of that old stone fort at Fort Totten, built with granite 6 feet thick and mortar between them, and that's where you find the ferns. Build walls in your backyard for the ferns, people, please. Would you do that for them? Because that's the only place they seem to do well, these ferns anyway, on acidic Long Island, you know, because of the acid rain, and the soils are basically acidic. But in these, in the mortar, the decaying mortar, you find the ferns, these lime-loving ferns. And here's our paper I did with Dave Locke, 1983, Stone Fort at Fort Totten, the last habitat of Woodsia obtusa and Asplenium platynuron in Queens County. American Fern Journal, 73, 6-8. That's, I don't think it's being published anymore, but it's still around. Libraries. Here's Asplenium platynuron, the other fern I found in Fort Totten. And this is, you can also find it occasionally in the woods, Stillwell Woods, I found it once. And here's other ferns, other aspleniums to show you what the linear indusia look like on this type of fern, the aspleniums. Here's a pretty fern, the maidenhair spleenwort, which I don't see a lot of on Long Island, honestly. And Cystopteris fragilis, the fragile fern. Rich and I found this at Geary Park in the spillway of the old mill. I don't think it's being used anymore, and you can't get to it. You cannot get to it. I can only photograph this with a telephoto lens. But there it is. This is where you find your rare ferns, in the walls, in the mortar, wet spots, perpetually wet spots. Ferns in natural landscape, here are desert ferns from the high desert of central Mexico. Here's Arctic and alpine ferns, Botricium lunaria, the moonwort, found both in Newfoundland and in Switzerland on the high mountains. So this is what they call Arctic and alpine, and it's when the glaciers moved south, they moved, these ferns somehow preceded them and found refuge high up in the mountains, and you don't find them elsewhere, or, you know, some of them you don't find elsewhere. Here's Cryptogramma crispa from Switzerland. And here's ferns in the tropics and subtropics. Sri Lanka has, I mean, this is the botanical garden, but it gives you an idea of how abundant and rich and varied the ferns are. Here's Dixonia in an Araucaria angustifolia forest in southeastern Brazil. It's just something out of the age of the dinosaurs, I think. Here's the beautiful ferns of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. I hope they're still around after those lava flows. I'm sure they'll form elsewhere, but these are particularly beautiful ferns, Cybotium. And here's a little special thing that I just discovered in putting this talk together. New Caledonia and Fiji, I consider these are glimpses of the landscape of the Eocene epoch, and really even Cretaceous. When you go back down to it, and I'll tell you why. And these were the animals that were around at the time when these ferns were part of a whole continent. Traveling through New Caledonia and Fiji is like revisiting the Earth at the end of the Mesozoic. Those island complexes were part of Gondwanaland in the late Cretaceous. They drifted to their current position by the early Eocene. So they usually say Eocene, separated since the Eocene. The Glyciniales and the Skyziales, Cyatheales and Maradiales dominate the landscape, not the Polypodiaceae, like up here, New Caledonia and Fiji. So here's Gondwanaland, and the big blue arrow, and I mean big, shows where New Caledonia and Fiji were in relationship to Australia and Antarctica, which you know was covered with ferns, and among other things, yeah. Here's where they are today, having drifted out. New Caledonia here, Fiji there, but they are part of the continental crust. And presumably those plants drifted out with them to their present position. And so here's Maradiales. This is Maradia, to show you those, I don't know, would you say 15 feet, maybe 20 feet long? They grow bigger than that, fronds. Here's the Maradia attenuata. The fern understory of Fiji looks like this. This is Dipterus glyciniales. This is what the undersurface of the leaf looks like. We don't have ferns that look like that here. Look at the dichotomous branching of the veins. Here's Dicronopterus with a lycopodium, which is the glyciniales. Here's the roadside with Glycinia and another fern, Sphenopterus, over here. This is what you see all over the tropics, by the way, on the roadsides. Here's Glycinia, mostly species of Fiji. So many of them, just like our Polypodiaceae here, and the clusters of sporangia and sori, peculiar sori. Here's a really unusual fern. This is Stromatopterus moniliformis, which was the subject of a number of papers by a evolutionary plant morphologist, Bierhorst, back in the 50s, I think it was, and 60s. And this is where you find them. They're in the understory of an Araucaria woodland in New Caledonia. These are strange places. And it's just a single branch sticking up out of the earth. I think the rhizome has rhizoids instead of roots. This is a very strange plant. And this is Stromatopterus. Here's Actinostachys melanesica, also the subject of a paper by Bierhorst in the Skyziales. And it looks like a little bit like the fingers of the curlygrass fern, you see, up here. And here's the sort of the curlygrass fern near relative, Skyzia bifida in Oceania. These have worldwide distributions, you see. And here's this beautiful dichotomously branching Skyzia. And here's Drinaria. Now finally you get some Polypodiaceae, but they're high up on the trees, I think, here. This is Drinaria and Asplenium Australazicum. So you can't say they don't have any polypodiaceae, but they have few. So I'll leave you, I think, with this one from New Caledonia, Dicksonia thursopteroides, fertile fronds and sterile fronds. Beautiful.